Welcome back to another episode of the Max Term Podcast. Kyle Stitch here alongside James Finch. And today we're going to go into another deep dive on the team that just seemingly can't find answers based in New York State. I paused for a second to let you wonder which team we were talking about, but this is going to be about the Buffalo Sabres, as probably the episode title indicates anyways, but it's not like the Rangers and Islanders are doing great either.
I was going to say, we'll see what happens over the next couple of the weeks. The Rangers might get their own episode again soon.
Well, probably not until after the holidays.
Yeah,
so we're planning on, this is probably our last episode before the holidays, take a couple week hiatus, and we'll be back in the new year. I think last year we did like a New Year's resolution episode, and maybe we'll do something similar again. But yeah, this will be our last episode, I guess, before our holiday roster freeze, if you will. And yeah, so Buffalo Sabres, as we sit here recording this, we're recording a little bit early this week. We're sitting here, they're on an 11-game losing streak. And I guess everyone's wondering what the answer is. We know what the problem is, but what's the solution? I guess, how did we get here? Yeah,
so I guess the short, quick answer is there's either multiple solutions, potential solutions, or there isn't one. It probably depends how far into the future you're looking. But I guess we can kind of take a step back or a few steps back, however you want to look at that. And do we go back to the past off season? I guess.
I think that's probably where to start. So I was going to grab some more numbers than I did, but the Sabres had turned over this off season virtually their entire bottom six. I think there's 2 returning players, Jordan Greenway, Peyton Krebs.
Greenway, Krebs, maybe Benson.
Depending on where you want to classify him in their lineup.
So anywhere 50 to 75%, depending on where you slot guys in.
Yep. Top 6 largely unchanged, a little bit of shuffling. Prospect Yuri Kulik has been more of a regular in their lineup. I wouldn't say full on regular, but he's seen a substantial number of games at
lately.
This point.
For sure. Beginning of the season, not so much. He was very in and out of the lineup, but right.
Kind of a change there, kind of.
Yeah.
So almost half of their forward group was changed this offseason. On defense, I mean, depending on how you want to look at Bo Byram, like he was not in their opening night roster last year. He is this year, but he did play a stretch of games after the trade deadline with them.
Still relatively new. Plus, not to go off on a tangent, new coach. So just still very new for him.
Matthias Samuelsson, I guess it's a similar question. Started in the lineup last year, started in the lineup this year, then injuries, back in the lineup now, missed all of last season. Dennis Gilbert would be a depth player, same with Jacob Bryson. Like, those are just depth adds that they did. Largely, the blue line was unchanged.
Right.
And then goalie, James Reimer, kind of in. I know he ended up in Anaheim for a while, but the intention was to potentially have him in as well.
Yep.
So maybe another change there. So not quite half of their roster, but a third. I think third of their roster, NHL
easily.
Was turned over this offseason. I was gonna try and count how many similar type of roster turnovers there were. I know the Washington Capitals had, I think 7 new players. But as far as fringe type playoff teams, so that's what I would have considered the Sabres coming into this season. I can't think of any roster that necessarily turned over as much as they did. Maybe like the Florida Panthers with cycling in and out depth guys, and maybe the Toronto Maple Leafs also had some level of turnover as well. But I can't think of anyone that were approaching 6, 7, 8 new players in their lineup that were fringe playoff to playoff team last year.
And I guess this could be something that could be researched. Maybe it has been. I think what you're kind of getting towards, at least, is too much turnover can hurt a team a little bit or slow things down. Part of my issue looking at the offseason in that regard, the fact that it was pretty much the bottom 6, for sure, let's say half at least of the bottom 6, might not be enough of a consistency there. It's one thing if you have 2 guys left from the previous year, they kind of know how to play with each other, and you bring in one who has to kind of learn to fit. But if you have a line that's made up of even 2 new players or potentially 3 at certain times, none of them really know how to play together. I guess we could say Aube-Kubel and Mallenstein a little bit. But in general, they're not familiar with each other, so chemistry is not going to be there right away. Plus, they're learning a newer system. Even if there's some sort of familiarity to it, it's new to them. I feel like when you have that much new in one spot of the roster, you have to predict ups and downs for sure.
The kind of irony being, so that was not necessarily, I don't disagree with your point. That's not necessarily where I was headed at all.
Okay.
Because I'd argue that most of those players that have come in have been the better, the quote-unquote bright spots.
Most have, for sure. But there have been ups and downs.
Yes. I was going to more go towards, and I think this is where what you had just laid out kind of strengthens what I was kind of going towards, is I understand the criticism of there hasn't been a big move. I understand that. But they also turned over approximately a third of their roster this offseason.
Right.
And to your point is there's a point where maybe there's too much turnover, so doing even more was okay. I mean, we'll get into feasible and stuff like that, but maybe there is a point where you just say we've turned over a third of our roster already. How much more can we really do? So that's kind of where I was going. Like, I understand the criticism of the general manager, everyone in the front office, and we'll get into that. But I kind of wanted to start there because it's not like this past offseason he sat on his hands by any means.
Correct.
He made one of the bigger trades in the offseason, frankly. So sending out Matt Savoy for Ryan McLeod. Added 4 forwards. I mean, a depth defenseman, a depth goalie.
It's not what people are going to want to hear because it wasn't the offseason, but that Middlestat Byram trade it should be looked at as a move for this season.
Yep. And we can, I guess, let's since we're kind of going retrospectively first, let's start there. I think a month or 2 ago we said probably would like to hit the undo button on that if they could.
Since then,
it's
flipped pretty much.
I think you can still make an argument that they still maybe would benefit from having Casey Middlestat as a 2C. But I think there's a stronger argument that Bo Byram's been probably one of their more important players in the past month or so,
Yeah.
which isn't saying a whole lot when the team's lost 11 games in a row, but
it hasn't necessarily been because of him. So even with mistakes here and there, it for sure. I would say to the point of not wanting to do too much, I think the very initial reaction for a Sabres fan, and I want to say this might be the case because I feel like the initial reaction to that is probably, what are you talking about? They just did some of these depth moves lower in the lineup. I think trying to take a step back, what you said of wanting to be careful to not do too much and have too much change can be very legitimate. I don't know if true is the right word, but very legitimate of something that you need to worry about, while you could also have the opinion that of the things they did, some of them were either not the correct move to make, or just ultimately you would like to see a bigger move for a more higher in the lineup player. That's very fair. You can think both of those things at the same time.
yes. And I mean, I think I implemented this rule back in the summer or maybe early this season. We'll call it don't make me tap the sign rule. You tell me what. So it's absolutely fair to criticize management for not doing enough. But you tell me this offseason as a listener at AFP Analytics on X.
Yep.
What transpired this offseason that you think they should have done? And then if you're talking about signing a player, add another $500,000 probably to their contract. Keep the same term, maybe add another year or two. And then decide, would you have wanted to do that? Let's run through some of the free agent moves some of the ideas that could have been out there to fit a need. Start with Steven Stamkos.
Right. So he got 8x4. So you want to do 8.5x4 or 8.5x5?
Or 8x5, maybe 8x6.
Yeah.
Anything in that ballpark?
Stick with that team, Marchessault. 5x5, I believe it was.
Somewhere in that ballpark.
Just about. So you want to do
almost 6x5.
Almost 6x5 for him. Maybe either of those players go to a different team and things are good for them, but it's not looking good right now.
No.
Which, by the way, I will fully eat that prediction pretty much. That's just, I had them going deep into the playoffs. It's the exact opposite. Those moves are not working.
No.
You want to point to Toffoli. I believe that was
6 million, 4 years. Yeah.
So 6.5 to 7.
Maybe add a year or two as
4
well
years,
to
5
that.
years.
So
maybe, but he's got palm trees where he is. Well,
he has taxes and palm trees.
He does have taxes.
So maybe
he has palm trees.
Yeah. I mean, there occasionally seem to be some palm trees in the Sabres arena now, but
yeah. You look at the Bertuzzi, Teravainen, you can do the same exercise, add $500K another year. Maybe Bertuzzi, I would actually say that's fine. At the end of the day, free agents chose their teams for whatever the reasons were. So you can't pretend and say, well, why didn't we sign X player for that contract? Very well could have been on the table for that same exact contract, and they didn't choose Buffalo. So you kind of assume you need to pay a little more. Defensively, just to throw out a couple names, Brady Shea, that's not going very well in Nashville.
Nope.
Matt Roy is?
Well, he's been injured, unfortunately, for most of this season.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. Which is why you probably assume he is doing well, because you haven't heard his name
right.
negatively, which is what you want out of a Matt Roy type player.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's missed most of the season.
Okay. Well, even then,
probably fine with that contract.
Yeah. That was probably one of our favorite contracts this offseason.
Yeah.
Or moves, at least.
Brett Pesce probably would have been okay
fine.
within that realm.
That might actually be a good name to toss out there specifically for Buffalo because, and we'll go through what we think the team needs, but could argue a right shot top 4, really second pair guy. That's Brett Pesce. Flip it to the trade market. Like you mentioned, McLeod was one of the bigger trades.
Yep.
It was probably him and Mangiapane.
Yes.
To the Capitals.
Yep.
He had a no trade clause. And I know people don't want to hear that. It's very possible that wasn't an option. A lot of people, there was a lot of noise, Sabres, Twitter, Sabres X, whatever you want to call it, about Ehlers from Winnipeg. He didn't get traded. That's the other thing that I think it's really easy to look at some players that you think could have been had, but if they weren't traded, it's very possible the team just said we don't want to move them.
And then Martin Necas as well was another very popular name in Saberland, and there was some speculation after Kevin Adams' press conference that he was directly referring to Necas as a player that kind of nixed coming to Buffalo because he wouldn't sign an extension or anything. I think there's some pushback as to whether it was Necas or Ehlers or even someone else necessarily.
Yep.
But yeah,
really not a ton of options unless you want to overpay a lot for a free agent. We're pretty much using that $500K number or an extra year. So I guess it's not an exact quote of Adams, but he pretty much said like he had a trade lined up where people probably would have said he was crazy. Whether like I'm not in that room, I don't know if that's actually true. He said it. Wouldn't shock me because sometimes you have to overpay to get a player you want.
So I have every offseason trade. Found a quick NHL.com tracker. Washington Capitals acquired Jacob Chikrin from the Ottawa Senators. That's one that, going back to even when he was on the trade block from Arizona, is one that I have always thought was a good idea for them.
Really quickly, can you state what that trade was?
Yes, it was for Nick Jensen and a third-round pick in the 2026 NHL draft.
Okay.
So who's the Sabres' Nick Jensen in this situation?
I think most people would say Henry Jokiharju, but I think you also need to take a step back and say, is perception league-wide of Jokiharju and Jensen the same?
Maybe Matthias Samuelsson would be the other
potentially.
Again, what's perception? Especially with contract status and all that. So does Buffalo have the Nick Jensen type of asset?
Maybe.
But no one on their blue lines is experienced as Nick Jensen is.
No. Yeah, I would argue that I think there are arguments that one of those players could be just as valuable to the Senators as Nick Jensen.
Yep.
I don't think that's what perception necessarily is. So you can throw out the factor Senators trading him to the Sabres. Do they want to do that?
Is it a higher price?
Right. And maybe if it is, are they happy enough with Jensen and a third that they just do that? Maybe.
And again, is there a Nick Jensen on the Sabres roster? I think.
Right. It probably depends on who you ask.
Yep. Next one. Rangers acquire Riley Smith. I think no one's going to say that that's a miss.
Right.
St. Louis Blues acquire Radek Faksa from the Stars. The Sabres went out and signed equivalent players in free agency.
They acquired, whether through free agency or trade, 3 fourth liners.
Yep.
Don't need another one.
St. Louis Blues acquire forward Matthew Joseph and a 3rd-round pick for future considerations.
I would say fourth liner. Some people might say third liner. Don't need another bottom 6 forward.
Anaheim Ducks acquire Brian Dumoulin from the Seattle Kraken for a 4th-round pick. Maybe.
I lean towards no, but maybe. Like you could easily say, well, he'd be better than Gilbert. Well, yeah, but not necessarily an obvious Sabres should have done that move.
A little bit more of a veteran player that
Right.
they don't have, whether they need or not, but...
Right. Well, I guess if you're looking at what you think your bottom pair is heading into the season, he might not be the perfect fit for power, so it's fine that they missed that one. I don't think anyone's calling for Brian Dumoulin.
One that happened, I started at July 1st, John Marino as well. That was probably one maybe should have been in on.
That, I believe, was just picks, right? 2 seconds?
Believe that's correct. I don't have it in front of me.
Okay. That, if any Sabres fan said they should have done a deal there, yeah. Which I believe he got hurt for Utah. But that's still a trade. Looking at where Buffalo was at in the offseason and what their intentions were for this season, that's a trade that they should have made.
Yeah, 2 seconds, and Utah got a 5th as well, so a couple picks. Let's see. So another draft kind of one that... So Mikhail Sergachev, I don't think's worth that. That was just not going to happen for Buffalo. That was a deal that didn't necessarily make sense for the Sabres to do. I don't think another left shot, like puck moving type guy with multiple younger I don't think that would have made sense for the Sabres to do. Let's see, we have Tanner Jeannot acquired by the LA Kings, another bottom 6 forward.
Maybe I believe he went for a second, so I guess
Correct.
if they would have liked him over Malenstein, there's your second. But,
Yep. He went for a 2nd and a 4th.
Okay. Yeah.
And he's on a slightly less desirable contract than Beck Malenstein is.
Any trade with picks, Sabres could have done it if they wanted to. It's a question of fit.
Kevin Hayes went to Pittsburgh from St. Louis with no trade protections there.
Right.
Again, another bottom 6 type player. Logan Thompson. I don't think the Sabres needed to go out and get a goalie.
No. I will say I think you could have argued if the plan was for Levi to kind of spend some time in Rochester, but if you don't want him there the whole year, you can't go get a Logan Thompson.
Yeah, and they probably didn't need that high of like a quality, like
Right. UPL
or someone to play that many
didn't
games.
start super strong, but he's been better.
He's been far from their problem.
Right.
Vegas acquires Alex Holtz and Akira Schmid from the New Jersey Devils for forward Paul Cotter. You want another inexperienced forward?
So Cotter I
Cotter
want
could
to
have
say
made
has been
sense.
good.
Yeah.
The question is, who's Holtz for the Sabres? Before this season, who is Holtz?
It's one of probably the closest you're getting is Jack Quinn or JJ Peterka, probably.
Okay, and then seems like Vegas was somewhat interested in adding a goalie for depth purposes, maybe with a little future potential. Who's that from Buffalo?
No one.
Right. Well, it's Devin Levi, but that's
Yeah, not
way higher of a price, and you're not doing that.
so that's not a realistic. And I mean, Paul Cotter is not anyone that if you're getting upset about not getting Paul Cotter in a trade, I mean,
He's been really good for New Jersey, but he's kind of that third liner.
correct.
Like, you don't necessarily need that as Buffalo.
New Jersey acquires Jonathan Kovacek from the Canadians for a 4th-round pick. Maybe that would have been a swing, but again, you're getting another... Like, he's been really good with New Jersey, but you're getting another young, unproven defenseman.
Right.
Getting back to post... Those all were leading up to the draft. And then getting back post-draft. Robbie Fabry.
Nope.
Then you have Savoy, trade for McLeod and Tyler Tullio that the Sabres did. Dylan Coghlan, who was just waived today again.
Right.
A prospect swap by Ottawa and Edmonton. Not going to spend any time on that one. Pittsburgh got Cody Glass from Nashville.
That's fine.
Edmonton got Vasily Pokozin from Vancouver.
At this point, he's bottom 6.
Sharks got Cody Ceci for Ty Emberson.
Would have been interesting, but again, you're unproven young defenseman.
So is that Henry Jokiharju for Cody Ceci?
Well, okay, if you're talking Cody Ceci, I don't think that's necessarily an improvement. I'm sure there are people out there who would say otherwise.
I don't know how the Sabres were getting Ty Emberson in this situation.
So that's kind of what I was initially getting at there, was could be a good player to target, but also not necessarily the perfect fit of what you're looking for.
So the other one that probably stands out, especially fresh off the loss last night, Montreal Canadiens acquire forward Patrick Laine and a 2nd-round pick for defenseman Jordan Harris.
That's a pretty good one.
So if you want to point to one where maybe you can be upset about them missing out on someone, Laine might be top of the list.
Yep.
And that's basically into, and then we get to in season with Oli Mata, Timothy Liljegren.
I will say Laine had trade protection.
Yep.
So, again, yeah, he really wanted a fresh start out of Columbus, but could have easily said not to Buffalo.
Yep.
We don't know that, but it needs to be acknowledged.
So those are the trades that happened this offseason. I don't know. We said maybe one or two that can look back and question should have they beaten that price. And then there's also levels of trade protection. Did we check to see if John Marino had trade protection?
I did. I don't think it kicked in yet.
So that's one that maybe you look at and say, okay, that's something they should have done. But anyway, so that we've basically went through most of the big names that were moved, available in free agency. We have a couple that I think you could make an argument could have been a good idea. Maybe Bertuzzi in free agency, maybe Toffoli in free agency. John Marino, Brett Pesce in free agency.
Yeah.
Matt Roy in free agency.
Brandon Montour.
Brandon Montour in free agency
Not
would have
going
been,
to
but it
Buffalo.
wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And then maybe Laine. And that's a lot of maybes.
Yeah. And I think I don't even want to necessarily spend a ton of time on this exactly. It matters, but we've said it before. Buffalo's going to struggle to attract players. It's why we were mentioning add $500K or a year or both to what free agents got, and that might not even be enough. Tyler Toffoli, my guess, was very happy 4 years, $6 million, going to San Jose. Great spot to live. He's been out west in California before. Works for him, would be my guess. That's probably what happened there.
I will say I ran some contract numbers for players to see tax-wise how teams slot. Say up and down the free agent board, you could pick a sampling out, and I can give a little bit of reference, but I'm not going to disclose that. But just say everywhere from lower to upper echelon type players. I maybe ran Buffalo once, and I ran probably 5-ish, somewhere in there, different scenarios for different players.
Yeah.
And I think maybe one of the 5 was Buffalo, and I'm thinking back months at this point, but yeah, maybe 20% in my sample.
Right.
Which is probably a fair representation of the overall free agent market.
Right.
And that's just like gauging what the numbers would need to look like.
Yes.
It's not even that it probably means there's a level of interest there, but it's just gauging like, okay, if this offer were to come through, does this make sense from Buffalo compared to, say, Nashville for purposes.
Right.
And just kind of knowing where that's at.
Yeah.
So what level of interest, I don't even know. It's just seeing, how much more maybe do they need to be offered. So that was that's the reality of this past off season.
Right. So a lot of names you could honestly, in hindsight, say, they should have tried to make that happen. There's most likely some legitimate reasons why it didn't happen. Whether it's players just simply not interested, was a free agent, or had trade protection, didn't match up in a trade. Here's, I don't know if it'll end in a question, but a statement maybe we kind of build off. We kind of hinted at the need for a top 4 defenseman. We kind of have hinted, or I guess have straight up said, bottom 6 was taken care of. It's higher in the lineup. For a forward would be nice. When you're watching the games, which I know we're AFP analytics and everyone probably thinks we're just looking at numbers, but we actually do watch the games too.
Even though we're sitting here recording in a basement, we do watch the games. And being in Western New York, Sabres are easy for us to find on TV, along with Rangers, Islanders, in my case. So I watch mostly New York-based teams.
Right. Watching the Sabres, primarily, and I think you can look at just about every player and say there's been ups and downs this year, but primarily what has been, what part of the roster has been their issue? And I guess you can name a specific group, you can name something that is just overall a missing aspect of their game, however you want to kind of take that question.
My answer to that question is the players who are being put into positions to be the best, who are supposed to be the best players, are not the best players, night in and night out. I think there's times where that's a little bit harsh on some of them, but I think night in, night out, it's the players being paid and put in the top positions in the lineup that are just not consistent enough, not producing.
Yeah. I would say there's some more consistently not producing, or I guess if you want to take producing as points, just also some of the metrics are not strong. Some are having that problem much more consistently than others, but no one is really free of criticism. Do we go player by player and kind of talk about?
We'll do real quickly. So okay. I think the player that I would say is most free from criticism in the entire lineup is Jason Zucker. He's been probably consistently their most consistent player. That's kind of a weird way to put it. I'm not going to say consistently their best player because there are players with higher ceilings.
Yeah.
But I think relative to what you're hoping for from him, I think he's exceeded expectations and consistently done so.
So when he was signed, it was very much could he be second line, could he be third line? And he's kind of still played in that role back and forth. But in comparison to the rest of the lineup, like you've said, he is probably the one who is most consistently a positive force on the ice.
I guess if we're giving like a letter grade, a grade for each player, Jason Zucker gets an A minus from me.
Yeah.
I can't complain. I can't fault him.
Right. I 100% agree with that.
Jordan Greenway's also been quite good.
That was the next
Injuries
one.
has been an issue, but I'd give him probably A minus, B plus, probably A minus.
Yeah.
But another third line guy.
Right. Do you hand out any more A's to the forward group? Or A minus?
For a while, I would have been close with Tage Thompson and Alex Tuch, but Thompson seems to still be having injury residual issues. If you had asked me before he had missed games with injury, he would have gotten an A from me.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a grade I'd give anymore, and Alex Tuch is probably not quite there anymore either. Those are the only other two that I think I'd give A minus, B plus potentially.
Okay. I'm just going to start kind of running through some names. Ryan McLeod.
B minus, C plus. And I think that's
probably fair.
I think that's dropped a little bit.
Yeah.
If we had done this a month ago, it's probably he's anywhere B to like A minus, but I think he's a little bit below now.
Zach Benson.
Probably similar to McLeod, maybe probably in the B range. He's been fine.
Okay.
No problem, but he hasn't been.
And I guess I want to interject here. We're not doing this to trash the players. It's kind of to get an overall idea of where the lineup's at.
Correct. And this is kind of relative to their contract. I'm doing this in my head relative to their contract, expected performance, where they're at. Zach Benson, I think B. I mean, entry-level deal, second year.
He's been fine. This isn't... I would say I'd like to see a step forward from him, but that's not even close to being in the top 10 of issues for this team.
No, and I think if you talk about consistent line mates, he's been the one to probably get the least consistent line mates.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a level of like lack of chemistry there, and I think you can give him a little slack for that.
Yeah, so I'm not at all saying like I'm worried about Zach Benson. That's no. And it's far down the list of what I'm concerned with for this team. JJ Paterka.
C. Good for about the first month of the season. Has disappeared, and I think C is being generous.
Yep.
If we're talking pure recency bias, we're probably below a C. But I think trying to be fair on the season as a whole, C.
Dylan Cousins.
For a while, I would have had F. I'm going to go in the D range. He's been better as of late. He's probably been one of the more brighter spots in this 11-game losing streak.
I think, and we'll get to this, but you want to talk about any player potentially having some sort of response, reaction to what's going on. He's probably one of them. Hasn't been perfect by any means, but he's shown a little bit more of late than he was showing.
Yes. But again, lack of consistency.
Right. It's not like problems are fixed by any means, but it seems like he's reacted a little bit to the team's issues. Jack Quinn.
Probably right around the same grade as Dylan Cousins. Again, been better lately. I'd probably give him a little bit higher because I'm willing to chalk up a level of he's still recovering from 2 pretty serious injuries. Yeah. So the ire that's been directed at him in particular, I think you have to look at. I understand you want immediate results, but you have to look at big picture with him. So I guess I'll give him a C- because I'm going to consider the injuries as a factor.
Yep.
And he has been playing better as of late.
And then for forwards, I guess we'll run through kind of I was going to say run through the fourth line, but I'm not going to lump this player in there. Yuri Kulik.
B-. He's, yeah. I mean, that might be even a little harsh. I think that's a little harsh.
Yeah, maybe. I'd give him a B+. Even.
Yeah.
He's, for the most part, been what you want him to be so far. I mean, production's not there, but it's not really there with anyone. There's been nights where he's top 3, top 5 best Sabre on the ice, which I get a lot of people probably sitting there saying that's not hard to do. But he's a rookie. He's just somewhat recently started to have consistent playing time. I would say I'm fairly happy with what he's been able to do considering the circumstances.
Yep.
Now to the fourth line. I guess we'll do Peyton Krebs as he's the returning member of that line.
B-.
I've been fine with him.
Yeah.
In that role.
Would I like to see more? Yes. I've always would like to have seen more from him, but fine.
For playing that role, fine. Yeah. I guess we'll just go by cap hit maybe here. Sam Lafferty.
D.
Yeah. Abe Kubel. Keeping in mind there were some injuries, but that kind of plays into it a little.
Probably right around the D as well. There's been a few more bright spots, but there's also been some mind-boggling other issues there with penalties and giveaways and things.
Yep. And that leaves the
Beck Malenstein
acquisition.
C+.
Yeah.
He's been fine.
So that's the forward group. Run through the defense. Rasmus Dahlin, he's hurt as of recording this. He might be on his way back soon from a back injury. But overall on the season,
A-.
Yep. That's where I was kind of thinking you'd land.
There's been a few issues, but I think the games he's been out, you realize how important he is to that team.
He's not immune from late game, just bad penalty or random giveaway turnover,
bad D-zone coverage.
But
I think if he was playing right now and they were in this skid, I would probably be giving him a lot lower of a grade.
Yeah,
but I think you're seeing how important he is to that blue line, which he should be given his contract. Breaking news as we're sitting here recording, notification just came across. We have a trade. Does not involve the Buffalo Sabres, but does involve maybe 2 players that could have been ideas for an in-season shakeup for the Sabres. The Rangers have acquired Will Borgen. You should go because you have the details in front of you.
Yeah, so Rangers get Will Borgen, right shot defenseman from Seattle, as well as a 2025 third and 6th in exchange for Capo Caco.
That's a good piece of work by the Rangers.
Yeah. They turned a situation that was really heading downhill, an individual situation, and still managed to get some value there.
And probably got one of the more realistic right shot defensemen available, better options available right now.
Well, I mean, so we'll get back to the Sabres in a second, but on a recent episode, we ran through rentals who we would expect to be available around the deadline. At that point, For right shot defenseman, it was Jacob Trouba and then Will Borgen. Both have been traded. Maybe Trouba's available again at the deadline. Who knows? I don't think so, but it's very possible that, like, if you needed a right shot defenseman,
the Rangers just controlled the entire market, basically.
Yep.
So, let's finish grading our defense, but Will Borgen to me would have been an idea.
One of the more, and you could debate whether it would be the right move or not, but one of the more realistic options that they could have targeted.
And I'd even argue, I don't know if Kaapo Kakko's the exact level of forward they need. I think he's similar level of play to a lot of what they have.
Yeah.
But that would have been a level of shake-up move.
Yep. Okay, so back to Sabres. Pretty much said A- for Dahlin.
Correct.
Owen Power.
C.
I think that's fair. Just an average.
He's had some fantastic moments where I think he was being overly criticized, and then he's had some rough moments as well, especially more rough as of late without Dahlin in the lineup.
Yeah. Samuelsson.
I have less of an issue than I think a lot of people do with him. I'd probably give him right around the same C as Owen Power. I think so. You look at his metrics, and they're not great, but they're not bad. They're very average for a bottom 4 defenseman, which is all he's being paid all he's being slotted in the lineup as. I see a lot of criticism of him. I think it's because he doesn't make flashy positive plays, but he makes some really bad negative plays, so those stand out. But if you're only seeing that once every game, every couple games from a player like that, that's really not that big of an issue. I mean, it's an issue, but
you should be able to overcome that.
Yes.
Bo Byram.
B+. Maybe B.
Yeah, I would have said B. But that's...
I'm an easier grader.
He's been good at times. Lately, he's been a little better than at the beginning of the season. I think his grade has trended up in general throughout the year. Connor Clifton.
In the high D, low C range.
Yeah.
I think there's a stretch that he was fine, but you want to talk about a lot of kind of standout blunders. There's been a lot more recently. He is trended down. If we had done this a month ago, I'm probably in the high C's, low B's. Now I'm probably low C's, high D's for him.
Henry Jokiharju.
D-ish, maybe D-, barely passing.
Yeah.
I know that he's the easy one to pick on, and I know that there's issues there, but I also kind of like what I said for Samuelsson. I think it's to the point where you're looking for blunders.
Right.
And it's more under a microscope, again, because of the way he plays. I don't know. I'm not going to give him a full-on F, but not much past that.
I'll toss out Bryson and Gilbert kind of together.
Bryson, C range, fine. Gilbert, D-ish.
Yeah.
He's not good. I know they had won some games with him in the lineup for a little while, but he's not good.
Every once in a while, he'll make a nice pass, end to end. I'm like, where did that come from? But it's not enough to...
And then he'll take 2 penalties.
Right, yeah. I'd say moving on to the goalies, for the most part, I feel like it's just UPL to kind of talk about. Sort of Reimer.
I'll give let me just give an overall grade for goalie. Put it at B. There's been a couple games that they've lost because of poor goaltending.
But in general, more often than not, it's... goalies are kind of hung out to dry.
Yeah,
little bit.
even like I know fans were upset with Devin Levi's game at the beginning of the season. I'm not gonna say he was great, but like he was fine.
Yeah.
So I'd say B on a whole. I don't think the goalies have lost them that many games.
And Christian Ehrhoff. No, I'm just kidding.
Christian Ehrhoff was a tremendous contributor. Probably wish they still had him, to be honest. He would actually be a really good partner for Owen Power.
So I would say ideally you probably have another player or two in the A's.
Yep.
I think the real issue is the amount of players in the low C's and D's range.
Even into the B's and down. I mean, as you said.
Yeah, I just mean if more of that lower of the pack grades were moved up just a little bit, probably have a much stronger team.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them get knocked because of consistency. I mean, that's where we go back to. How many times did I say there were stretches that this player was fine?
Right. Okay, so we talked about the offseason, what they could have done or could not have done, I guess. We ran through the roster, kind of where's everyone at right now? I guess I'll put this. We can go down the road of how do they fix it. We can talk about coaching.
I think I think coaching, management, everything kind of is all intertwined in what's the solution.
Okay. Yep.
I do want to point out, kind of tying the offseason with the grades I gave out. More of the offseason moves were in the I mean, I don't know. I gave a lot of the third liners like C's, but like again, there's the acquisitions I'm not going to say have been fantastic, but I gave most of them B's, C's, with Jason Zucker getting an A.
Generally, you look around the league, there's really good bottom six forwards.
Yep.
Or elite fourth liners. A lot of really good teams have third and fourth liners who you would give a C or C minus to.
Yeah.
And yet the team's really good because their top six and top four players, forwards and defensemen, are mostly in the A's and B's.
Exactly. I think that's so. There's where I think that's where our transition is to what's the solution? What are potential solutions? So they've tried a new coach.
Yep. Tried a new coach. A lot of people will point to the other coaches are either the same or were in the organization. Which maybe that matters.
Real quickly on that. I just want to kind of provide context here that most of the time when a head coach is hired, they add one of their assistants. Maybe they might be given two. But a lot of times the organization is the one. It's not uncommon, I'll put it this way, for the organization to dictate a level of assistant coaches.
Right.
So
that is a narrative that I think is for sure out there in the Sabres fan community, as far as the organization didn't let Ruff pick his coaches.
And I'm not going to full on disagree, but I do want to provide this is not the NFL where a head coach hires all their coordinators down to their quality and everything. The NHL, there is a level that the organization kind of dictates.
Yep.
And so Like it's just that's just the reality. So I understand that maybe yes, you should have given Lindy Ruff an opportunity to bring someone that he's familiar with, but that's just generally not how it's not a full autonomy type thing in the NHL. So
Right.
there can be criticism, but I want to make sure that there's some context to that criticism and not just going, well, he should be able to pick all his coaching staff. That just doesn't happen in the NHL generally.
I think it would be fair. So I guess sort of on that note still, there's arguments that you can say whatever the philosophy is not working. They are 30th power play. Not quite as bad with the penalty kill, 22nd. But with both numbers in the bottom half, that's not good.
And the penalty kill... So the penalty kill was bad 2 years ago. Was fine last year.
Yeah.
I think they finished at least in the top half of the league last year. And then this year have regressed. So there's a level of, I mean that's
they were 13th on the penalty kill.
Yeah, so right,
year,
yeah, so right above the midpoint, basically, a little bit better than average on the penalty kill. Power play's been bad for 2 years now.
Yeah,
basically the power play's been bad since teams understood that letting Tage Thompson shoot from the face-off office, the OV office, if you will, is a bad idea. Since teams caught on to that, the Sabres power play has been disastrous.
Yep.
So that's 2.5 years now. Well, I guess almost 2 full seasons, half this year,
right,
half previous, and then full last year.
So special teams, both of them, not good. I don't have any of the exact numbers in front of me. I know it's been thrown out there that style of play has changed a little bit at 5-on-5. Less of a carry-in team, more of a dumping the puck in. To me, like, it's very easy to point to something when things aren't going well. This is also a coach that I think has had to just keep throwing darts and hope one of them hits.
Yeah.
Just switching things up a little bit because, and this might not be an exact quote, but it's pretty much quoting Lindy Ruff, he was at a loss for words of what to do, essentially, which I guess brings up a whole different conversation in a way, but I think that is some of the change, is what was being done was not working. Try something different, and that's not working. Coaching staff or team, what do they do? Where do they go from here?
I mean, ultimately, so I think my stance has always been that the ultimate at this point is the players have to, like, it's easy for them to say that the solutions in this locker room, all that's basically a post-game quote every single game. But at some point, either one of the quote-unquote core players has to be traded, or they just have to figure it out. And I mean, so maybe it's another coach, whether head coach, assistant coach, to come in to motivate. But you supposedly, I mean, you completely changed the type of coach that was running the ship. That isn't working.
Right.
So at some point, you just need to have your players find an effort level. And I'm not there, and I want to be careful to say, like, I know that they're trying. I'm not saying that they're out there dogging it by any means, but whether it's mental, whether it's physical, something's got to change there. and I don't know if it's another coach to motivate them, or if you just have to start shaking basically trees to see what falls.
I will kind of piggyback off of that. I don't want to say effort. I think at times, I won't call out specific players doing this, but at times it is somewhat apparent that when the game's lost, not everyone's fully there. But like you said, that could be just more of a mental thing. Maybe a different way to kind of phrase what's happening or the situation. A lot of other teams, and I guess I'll say the good teams, but some of the bad teams probably have this. When things aren't going well, there's a next gear that they, and sometimes going to that next gear might mean they are opening up a little bit too much defensively, but they kind of have to make that trade. I haven't really seen a next gear for Buffalo for the majority of this season.
No, I've seen them downshift,
right,
but not necessarily upshift.
Right. I don't know if it's kind of waiting for the next, like the player beside you to do something. I don't really. I mean, anyone could be sitting there listening to us saying like, okay, well, yeah, these guys don't have the answer. Sure, I don't have the answer. I know that. But just speculating on what the answer could be, like it's unlikely you can make a significant enough trade to straight up improve your team at this point in time. You might be able to do one of those hockey trades to try and shake things up, give the room a jolt, and hope it works. It very well may not work. We've kind of been through this just when it gets to be trade deadline season and moves are made. A lot of times the impact isn't actually there in the way that you would think when you're acquiring a bigger name.
I mean,
could be.
A hockey trade was made last year at the deadline. Casey Middlestat for Bo Byram.
Right.
That was a hockey trade.
And
didn't do much.
No, exactly.
I mean, if anything, I think it hurt the team because Byram did not come in and fit right away.
Yeah.
And they really missed having Middlestat as their second line center.
Yeah.
So you could do that type of trade, and that's probably where this ends up.
Yeah.
But expecting that to be the solution is you can't just say that, oh, bring in, trade out, I'll just say Dylan Cousins for another Bo Byram type, like younger defenseman, complete your top four to blue line, and then have Yuri Kulik as your second line center, and just, that's basically what they did last year. Could work great. Could also not work at all.
Part of the issue is even if you find a hockey trade, generally you're not trading like, okay, here's a center, I'm going to move to shake things up, I'm going to get a center back. Less likely. It's, especially in season, you're probably looking at a team that has more of a strength that they're willing to deal from. So chances are if you've got a forward, you might be looking at a defenseman coming back or vice versa.
The Rangers trade we interrupted this episode with, where Rangers get Borgen sending out Kakko.
Yep.
That's the type of thing that's might be out there.
So if a hockey trade happens, chances are you're not filling you're filling a need, but you still have the same amount of needs after that. Bo Byram's name has kind of surfaced as someone who is at least of interest to other teams. somewhat significantly. Like there's not a ton of updates right now from top insiders, but a lot of when there are top insiders updating everyone, it seems like there's a little something on Buffalo each time, and Byram's name is being mentioned a lot. Buffalo, you can argue, already needs a defenseman, so does the trade actually really help you? Byram is playing top minutes for Buffalo a lot right now, and was anyways as Dahlin's partner before he got hurt. You already need a partner for power. If you trade Byram because you need someone who can score a goal, your defense is real thin.
Unless Dahlin and Power are going to play 40 minutes a night together.
Right. Which isn't going to happen.
No, of course not.
That's not realistic. To get an idea, I looked at this earlier this morning. So we're recording this Wednesday night, December 18th. We'll just say it. Some games may have started at this point. But as of earlier in the day, Wild Card 2 in the Eastern Conference was the Ottawa Senators. They have 34 points. They're on pace for about 90, which might be a touch low for what the Wild Cards are usually. It's about right.
It's a little lower than I think it was last year. I think 2 years ago when the Sabres missed by 1 point, it was like 90. They had 92, and I think 93 was the Panthers or something like that.
So it might be a touch low, but let's just say 90 points gets you Wild Card 2. Well, currently the Sabres have 26 points. That would put them on pace for, if I round up, 67 points. That would be, I think I looked last year, and it was either fourth or fifth worst team in the league. As of right now, they are the worst team in the Eastern Conference. If they're on pace for 67 points and Ottawa is Wild Card 2 and they're on pace for 90, that's 23 points. You can break that down in different ways. We can say that's 12 wins that over the rest of the season you would potentially need to make up. And that is maybe being a little generous because 90, it might be a little more than 90 points that you need to get that Wild Card 2. Now, it might not be exactly 12 wins. There's overtime losses that can make up for that. But it's where they are at right now this season is going to be extremely hard to dig themselves out of. They're on an 11-game losing streak. They probably need an 11-game win streak to have a shot at Wild Card 2.
Yes. And what's kind of mystifying is, so we've done plenty of episodes where we reference underlying metrics. Corsi 4%, expected goals 4%. I know we had referenced there's a couple weeks ago, and I think they were like 52 and 49, something like that.
Corsi expected goals.
Correct.
Yep.
Respectively. Right now, 51.5 Corsi 4 percentage, expected goals 48.4.
So slight downtick on each.
Slight downtick, but neither of those are numbers that a bottom 5 team puts up.
Correct. Yeah.
And where they were a couple weeks ago is were definitely not numbers that a bottom 5 team puts up. The Rangers had numbers that were a little bit that were more concerning. So if you had asked me who should, by numbers, have a drop more in the standings, the answer is the Rangers. Like, they were playing at levels that were not necessarily sustainable.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Sabres were maybe overperforming a touch, but not extensively. So, I mean, this just goes back to, it's incredibly mystifying because it's not like they are a horrendous team metric wise. I know there's been some rough losses in there recently. I'm not gonna go, but like just looking at the numbers, they're not that bad. And I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to make the playoffs at this point, but their numbers are a 500 team. That's approximately about 82 points. You just laid out they're on pace for 67. That's 15, or in the way you put it, like 7-8 wins below like
where they would generally be.
And it's just missed like, so again, what's the issue? What's the solution? Well, the issue is just they can't close out games or get themselves up for games or
so to me you could break this down. Why is this happening and create more reasons, but they can't score. And once they get scored on, they crawl back into their shell.
And they can't play with a big lead because they crawl back into their shell.
Once they get scored on, yep.
Or even foreshadowing a goal which foreshadows a run.
Yeah.
Of goals against.
I will have the game on, and my wife is usually like reading or something, and it'll be 1-0 Sabres, and 20 minutes goes by and she decides to look up and it's 3-1 whoever they're playing is leading. So what happened? That's almost like a regular occurrence at this point, or at least in this losing streak. They don't always score first, but most of the games at some point at some point in that game, it's usually a little early on, you can actually sit there and say, they don't look too bad right now. And there's usually a moment, usually a goal against, where it just completely switches.
I mean, just to illustrate that point, the Tuesday night when they were playing Montreal, was over at my parents' house. Came home. By the time I left there to turn my TV on here, they had the game on, so I was watching a little bit there. Saw Dylan Cousins score to cut the lead or the deficit to 2-1, and they were starting to look good.
Great shot, by the way.
And I thought
props to Cousins.
And I thought that, okay, I'll get home and, maybe it's probably going to be like the same score. It's probably back and forth, not much happening. Come home, turn it on after a few minutes. 5-1.
Yeah.
Patrick Laine had just completed a hat trick. Like that.
I believe that was 3 penalties had happened for Buffalo in that time.
Correct. So that's just kind of how it's been in the past month almost.
Yeah. I want to use that Cousins goal as an example. That was a play where, for, I guess, call it a split second or a few seconds, it was kind of like, wait a minute, we haven't really been seeing that Dylan Cousins. I think for a lot of fans of a lot of different teams that might have a player who's struggling a little bit, they'd see that goal and be like, okay, here we go. Doesn't always end up happening. And I want to say I'm not just picking on Dylan Cousins. This can be a handful or two of players across the Sabres. He scored that goal, and I was like, that was a nice shot. Haven't seen that in a while from Cousins. I didn't have really that reaction of, okay, here we go. I had more of a reaction of, all right, whatever. As in, great play, but you're still down, and I'm not confident you're coming back. I'm really wondering if at this point whether they know they're thinking it or it's just subconscious. I wonder if that doubt is in that room.
Yeah, because you should be, as the player, looking at that as, okay,
Here we go.
here we go. And then it's 5-1.
Right. It feels like it's almost as soon as they're down, like, uh-oh.
They did have one good shift at some point right before Bo Byram took a slashing penalty.
Yeah.
To then basically open the Montreal floodgates. So let's kind of come to an end with, I guess, I think the common place that fans draw ire is Kevin Adams at this point, because that's, well, ownership, and then Kevin Adams. Ownership's not changing. You can think all you want of Terry Pegula.
I will say this, even if it were to change at some point, it's not happening this season. That's not something that just quickly happens.
And it's not something that solves all issues by
No.
any means.
No.
The team's still going to be based in Buffalo, New York. They still have the stigma of their current playoff drought. It's not like, I don't think Terry Pegula is disliked by players by any means. I'm not going to say that he's the best owner in the league or anything, but I don't think that players are avoiding Buffalo because of who the owner is.
Right.
I don't know if it's a selling point,
Right.
but I don't think it's a detractor. So the ire is Kevin Adams at this point, and that's probably the most logical change. But again, I'm going to point out, what more do you want him to do? Do you want him to trade Dylan Cousins for prospects or a fringe NHL player? Basically a suboptimal return, or return not in the, I guess, in the immediate help realm. Maybe. And then, okay, so my research that I did, and I wore my special koala slippers to make the pun. So let's discuss Kevin Adams' qualifications real quick. And I think this is what a lot of fans have pointed to for years. So I did a little research here. So Kevin Adams spent years as an assistant coach. Then I'd say kind of as a development / business role within the organization. Not necessarily not full on hockey ops, but I'm sure but working with like youth players and stuff in their kind of offshoot. Got some business experience, had coaching experience. Okay. I mean, is he qualified to be general manager? I mean, is anyone? So let me run through a few GMs in the league. Let me start off with Steve Yzerman when he was hired by the Tampa Bay Lightning. He held a figurehead role with the Detroit Red Wings. Did a little GMing for like Team Canada World rosters. That's not hard.
Yeah.
And then was hired by Tampa Bay. I know he did very well in Tampa Bay. Now in Detroit, that's not going well. But when he was in Tampa Bay, did anyone ever talk about he wasn't qualified?
It's because of the success.
Okay. I'll stick in the similar realm. Joe Sakic, hired by the Avalanche as a figurehead, then gradually moved more into hockey ops, but was never necessarily a scout, never an assistant GM or anything like that. Never in a player development role. He had like 5 rough seasons. Like,
Yeah.
not complaining. I'm not comparing Joe Sakic to Kevin Adams necessarily, but like, there are some rough seasons in Colorado there. And I'd almost argue that the setup that he had with Patrick Waugh might be a little bit what's going on with Adams and Lindy Ruff right now. To an extent, I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
Again, Kevin Adams was probably actually more qualified than Joe Sakic was when he took over. And potentially Steve Yzerman. At least from post-playing career days. Ron Francis with Carolina. He never had any sort of coaching, player development, was just hired into the role of overseeing, of basically deciding hockey decisions, and then went to Seattle with his only experience being that Carolina role. I never see people talk about him being unqualified. Pat Verbeek with the Ducks, little bit of assistant GM time in Detroit with Yzerman, but was a broadcaster, player. Now with the Ducks, he's become pretty well respected. Chris Drury, Rangers, little bit in development, little bit in like some level of figurehead, some level of hockey ops role, but not anything extensive. Is being in that role or getting years of coaching experience more or less relevant? I don't know. But the amount of time before he was hired as GM and other roles he had, not much, actually is less than Kevin Adams. Danny Briere, Philadelphia Flyers GM, was their GM of the Portland Pirates ECHL team, and then basically rose very quickly to GM of the Philadelphia Flyers. Not much different than Kevin Adams' quick rise to the Sabres GM job. Portland is running the Portland Pirates in the ECHL, more experience than assistant coach in the NHL for years. I don't know. Mike Greer, San Jose Sharks. A little bit of scouting, a little bit of figurehead, a little bit of coaching. Pretty quick rise to the GM in San Jose. Got 2 agents that were hired to be GMs. I know that that's a different perspective. Kent Hughes, Montreal, and Bill Zito in Florida. Billy Guerin, Minnesota Wild. Little bit more in, he had some more player development time and then some more level of assistant GM experience, but fairly quick rise through the ladders. I'd say he grinded a little bit more than some of the other ones that I just named.
Yeah, a little AGM.
Yeah, he was AGM for Pittsburgh for, I think, 3-4 years. Kyle Dubas, I think he's got a unique path.
Yeah.
But so I don't know where to put him. Eric Tolsky, a different, unique path. Ottawa's set up a couple, like Steve Stais. He's got a little bit of a unique path, a little bit of junior GM experience, and then some like consulting type roles. I don't know. I think those are most of the former players that I talked about. And then a lot of the other GMs you would say would be quote unquote hockey lifers. Started as like had minor playing careers, but had been scouts, etc. for a very, very long time.
Right.
I think I hit on pretty much. Oh, Boston Bruins. I forgot one. Cam Neely, president of hockey operations. Never had any sort of role. Kevin Adams had more experience than Cam Neely before he was given that role.
Yeah.
Don Sweeney grinded for a few years as an AGM. I think that's now basically every former player in one of those roles. Listen, the results are not there. But talking about inexperience or whatever, that's just at this point, I think, a lazy narrative. There's certainly going to be other criticisms that I think are fair, but you look at I guess my point is there's things that I think there's things that you can say he's done well, namely drafting.
Yeah.
And I think that there's things that are fair to criticize, just like every other GM. But kind of continuing to go back to he wasn't, he didn't follow this path. I think that's the lazy narrative. And I also think that implying that bringing in someone like a Jim Rutherford, for example, Brian Burke, I'm just throwing out the hockey lifer names, as whatever, president of hockey ops, GM, whatever you want to say, and that's going to solve every issue. I just can't buy that.
So I think I'll say the inexperience, I think, is what fans use to explain what their actual problem is with Adams. It usually starts with something along the lines of he didn't make a big move. He's inexperienced. It's not necessarily why let's say, okay, he's inexperienced. That's not necessarily why he didn't make a big move. There's a lot of other more direct reasons of why a big move may have not happened. We kind of talked about this, I want to say yesterday or 2 days ago. And that's kind of where I was coming from, of like, even if you want to argue he is inexperienced, you can't like connect those dots directly and say that's why this is all happening.
Yes.
There's enough examples of inexperienced GMs not doing well, but there's just as many of them doing well. So
I think I just gave a pretty good rundown.
So it's not as simple as to say, oh, he's inexperienced. If you want to argue that what he has done is not good enough, go for it.
And I'm not sitting here disagreeing with that argument.
Right. It's just simply saying, well, he's inexperienced. That's not really, it's not the reason. I guess it could be, but it could very well be more likely a handful of other reasons. A lot of them talked about, a lot of them are joked about as, trying to be careful with my wording, unserious might be a right word, whether it's Adams mentions taxes in New York or kind of hints at the quality of life or weather is not as great in Buffalo as other places. And that's all turned into a big joke. And I get it is funny. It matters. They're not just hockey players who are there for your entertainment. They have families and live their life outside of hockey. It's sometimes probably the exact reason a player is deciding on to whether or not to go somewhere, or it's the fifth reason. People don't like to hear about the weather. They joke about it. It's the palm trees. It's funny. I get it. And then the taxes, well, that shouldn't matter. It might not at times, but it certainly does other times. Those are all direct issues that teams, not just the Sabres, teams throughout the league deal with.
Yeah, you don't see, Winnipeg would be a comparable situation. And
so that's weather. That's travel.
So
these things matter. Getting to Winnipeg is not the easiest of things, and that matters to people.
So they've been successful, but if you go through and look at most of how their roster's been constructed, it's exactly this in the same manner that that Kevin Adams has tried to construct the Sabres roster. One's working, one is not.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of draft, develop, basically trade a better asset for a couple younger, cost-controlled, limited trade protection type assets and make it work.
Yeah. So I guess to tie it back to Adams, like you can be bothered by how, call it, the past 6 months have gone. And I guess add on top of that the 13 years. I think you kind of said it perfectly, of bringing in someone else who's more of a lifelong hockey guy. Sure, a change could work, but it's very possible that it doesn't really change much. There's not a ton of players available right now. That executive would just come in dealing with similar issues of players don't want to come to Buffalo. And I guess as fans, you need to kind of have it can be very hard to take a step back, and because you're wanting your team to be really good and they've been really bad for so long, but trying to keep in mind what is realistic. Hiring a Jim Rutherford and firing Kevin Adams doesn't all of a sudden make Nikolai Ehlers available on the trade market. So I guess, and I guess I'll say this is my opinion. For this season, I am of the belief this season's done.
Mathematically,
it would be a miracle for them to come back.
I think their odds of getting like the first overall pick are not that far away from them making the playoff.
There's no sign of a turnaround at this moment. You can change the GM. Again, it's not going to all of a sudden make players available. You can change the coach. Maybe there's some type of spark there. Very well could not be. Everything we talked about throughout this episode, especially early on, we kind of centered around the players and some of the bigger names ultimately not living up to their role, their contract. Let's say they can acquire... I'll use Bo Byram as an example because his name's been out there. And there's been connection to the Canucks are interested in him. I don't think they're getting Pettersson. I think that was just hypothetical. What if it's like Connor Garland? Great player. Is that changing the issues for Buffalo? I guess you adds a good forward. Your defense is a lot weaker. Does it make Alex Tuch score goals? Does it make Dylan Cousins a more responsible two-way, can play in both ends of the ice center? Does it help Owen Power be a little more consistent so it's more often just the bigger moments and not the what just happened moments? I lean towards probably not. If you could somehow get Chris Kreider to waive his no-trade clause and come to Buffalo, pretty good argument. He's exactly what the offense needs. He's a net front scorer.
Who does
one of the
well
best in the league at scoring at the net front.
Who does well also in dump and chase recovering pucks.
Yeah. Which is what they've been trying to do as a team. So it's a perfect fit.
Another fit in the greater New York area that maybe could be had, Anders Lee. Exact same type of player. Really good at puck recovery, really good at net front.
Does that one player change things? Potentially. I will even say, to me, when you start to throw out names like a Kreider or a Lee, forgetting that they have trade protection for a second. You're bringing in leaders who have won before. By won, I just mean they've been on good teams. They know how to win, but they're also fitting pretty much exactly what is missing currently. That could be the player that helps turn things around, just in all aspects of what could be wrong, both on the ice and in the locker room, just mentally. But again, as we record this, Ottawa is on pace for 90 points as wild card 2. Buffalo is on pace for 67. That's 23 points, 12 wins. If you're even able to somehow acquire Lee or Kreider or any top 6 winger, does that help you make up that ground? And let's keep in mind, I know other teams' standings can shift. Ottawa seems like they already kind of went through their bad phase, and they're starting to turn it around. So I'm not necessarily expecting them to just fall off. And to continue, let's say they can pull off a big deal like that, somehow get, again, Lee, Kreider. You're probably giving up a Byram, even a Samuelson. Those are new holes on the roster in a spot where you kind of need to add someone right now. So it's making that issue even bigger. So I have a very hard time predicting positivity for this season for Buffalo. I think the bigger question, and it for a lack of a better word, it just kind of sucks that it's not January yet, and this needs to be kind of said, but the bigger question I think that needs to be asked and talked about is, this season's done. Who do we want here moving forward? Can ask that about players, about coaches, about the GM. Do you switch up your core? Lindy Ruff was on a 2-year contract, and this is how the first year is gone. Do you want a more long-term guy there? Adams has had a few years. It almost kind of went extremely positive pretty much right away, or quickly, not right away, but quickly, and then downhill really fast for ultimately 2 seasons in a row. You could argue and debate, is he who you want to be making these bigger trades of switching up your core? That's kind of where I'm at this point, is those more future questions. Because again, struggle to see, even if you are somehow able to pull off one of those bigger moves, I'm struggling to see how that would be enough for this season.
Yep. I think that's I think that's exactly the right question. And I think it's very fair too. So as much as I might have sounded like I was defending Kevyn Adams, I also think it's very fair to, at this point, question, does he deserve another shot at basically doing a level of a rebuild?
Well, and so to be very clear kind of about your point and add to this, change it however you want, Adams isn't blameless.
No.
But when you're going to start blaming, come to the table with something that has some evidence to it.
Yes.
That can't have a bunch of holes poked into it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Tap the sign. Tell me what you wanted him to do.
What did you want him to do? And then to the inexperience point, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but there's plenty of inexperience in that role throughout the NHL.
Correct. So let's finish here. Let's say that you are named GM for exactly one move. You can make one move. What's your move?
Ooh. That's a great question.
I was going to say a day, but that's probably its own episode. So I think we'll say one move. You're allowed
Right.
You're allowed to execute one move.
That's honestly a tough one. If I'm GM, I'd probably just start. I don't want to be mean here. I look at the roster and I say, who's not going to be here in 2 years? So, like, I guess this is not as fun of an answer. Henry Jokiharju, I'm getting what I can for him. That's probably the initial thing I start to do. Is at least with this roster, he's not necessarily a core player, but start to do something. See if it sparks anything. Hurts some guys a little bit, and they kind of find another gear, essentially. Like, okay, I'm pissed off. I'm ready to go. And if it doesn't, you just keep going. I guess I would also label this as it is not with the intention of a full rebuild, but you need to start shaking things up a little bit. And you can gradually do that. You don't necessarily need to do it like pedal to the metal, pedal to the floor right now. Because, again, this isn't being fixed for this season. It's going to be 14 years. Your one move.
I'm going to try and find a right shot defenseman to solidify my top four. And I think the team I'm calling is the New Jersey Devils. And I think I'm trying to pry one of Simon Nemec or Seamus Casey out of there. And
I have to ask the follow-up, what are
am
you
I
trying to do as far as moving a player? Because I guess to preface this, those are two very valuable assets as far
Correct.
as young, controllable right shot defensemen.
I think it has to, I think the players on the table probably in that move have to be JJ Peterka or Jack Quinn. Maybe Yeri Kulik. And I think I'm probably moving one of them.
Okay.
And so if the Devils are, if we're trying to make a deal, I think they want Peterka.
Yeah.
And I think I might do that. Because
it's hard.
It's hard, but
Yeah.
that's the point it's at. Like, would I prefer to move Dylan Cousins? Of course I would. Maybe I might even entertain Alex Tuck. I don't think he gets one of those two guys. His contract's
Not
a little
right
more
now.
reasonable, but maybe Tuck and a little bit, but
2 seasons ago, he's getting it.
yeah.
But, yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the type of move at this point. I think there's enough forwards in your organization that, yeah, that would sting. And yeah, JJ Peterka could go and do tremendous things with New Jersey or wherever he ends up after that.
Yeah.
But I need a shakeup. I'm not going to say I have more JJ Peterkas, but I have enough forward prospects that project to be middle six, maybe even top six players. I need another defenseman who can be a long-term solution. So it shakes up my core, and it brings back the defenseman I want. So I think that's my move.
Okay.
So at that, there's our moves. It's our thoughts. Long episode. Hopefully you stuck through it. But we appreciate you listening. Our content's generally going to be available on X at AFP Analytics. Post a little on Blue Sky as well. Max Stern Podcast available on pretty much all major podcast platforms, listening platforms.
In the near future, be on the lookout and ready for some mid-year to, I guess, into February trade deadline prep as far as potential contracts. We should be throwing out some new contract projections for the upcoming free agent class.
Yep, I think that I was gonna say tune in tax at AFP Analytics. I think once the calendar turns to 2025, should have some fun, exciting things coming out. Hopefully, so.
Yep.
That's the best place to follow along for that. We appreciate you listening and hope you have a good holiday, a good new year.
Don't let the Sabres bring you down.
And we'll talk to you in the new year.